zoology class. In the previous classes, we have started these human health and diseases, and we have gone through all the common diseases, pathogenic diseases, bacterial, viral, and protozoan diseases we have completed. In the last sessions, we have talked about even malaria, and we have started immunology. A brief introduction to immunology. See here. Immunology. It is a branch of science which deals with our immune system and immune responses, which will help in fight against the disease causing pathogen. So here, what is immunology means? It is a branch of science. Immunology. It is a branch of science which deals with our immune system and immune responses. Immune responses to what? To disease causing pathogens or foreign substances, which is called pathogen, which cause disease. Immunology. Father of immunology is Emil von Behring. Emil von Behring, he is the father of immunology, and he is the one who have discovered antibodies. Antibodies were identified by the same person, Emil von Behring. He is the father of immunology. Father of immunology. Apart from this, what is immunity? See, immunity. It is the ability of our body to fight against with disease causing pathogen. See, in our day-to-day life, we will come across with many pathogens, yet we are not falling into diseased condition. This is because we have our own inbuilt mechanism to fight against with that disease causing pathogen. So the ability of our body to fight against with the disease causing pathogen is known as immunity. See here, the ability of the body to fight against disease causing pathogen is known as immunity. The term immunity was coined by Burnett. The term immunity was coined by Burnett. This is important, no? Father of immunology is Emil von Behring, who has also identified antibodies. Apart from that, the term immunity was coined by Burnett. Our immune system is broadly classified into two types: non-specific immunity and specific immunity. What is that? We shall see. Our defense mechanism is classified, it is broadly classified into two types, that is non-specific immunity and specific immunity. Non-specific immunity is the generalized response of the body. It will be same for all kinds of pathogens. Whereas specific immunity is highly specific to a particular antigen or a particular pathogen. See here. Our defense mechanism defense mechanism of our body is broadly classified into two types. One is non-specific immunity, and the other one is specific immunity. Non-specific immunity and specific immunity. Non-specific immunity is the immunity which will act upon the antigen without antibodies. See here, non-specific immunity is generalized response of the body. It is generalized response of the body and it will fight against the antigen by means other than the antibodies. No role of antibodies. Okay. What are these antigen antibody? We shall discuss. Okay. Whereas specific immunity, it is highly specific to the particular antigen. Highly specific to the particular antigen, and it will act upon the antigen with the help of antibodies. With the help of antibodies. Okay. This non-specific immunity consists of two barriers or two lines of defenses. It is first line of defense and second line of defense. If you observe, first line of defense and second line of defense. First line of defense, it consists of physical barriers and chemical barriers. Physical and we can say that physiological barriers. These physiological barriers consist of chemical barriers. Whereas second line of defense, it consists of cellular barriers, interleukins. First line of defense consists of physical barriers, physiological barriers. Second line of defense consists of cellular barriers and interleukins. What are all these? In detail we shall study. And what does this specific immunity consist of? The specific immunity, it is the third line of defense, which is our actual immune system will involve in fighting against with the disease causing pathogen. See, these are all the barriers. See, if a pathogen wants to enter into our body, it has to cross these physiological barriers. Even if it has crossed this first line of defense, it has to come across with the second line of defense. Even if it is crossing the second line of defense, then it comes into picture this third line of defense. Third line of defense include the actual cells of our immune system, that are B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. It consists of B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. These are the actual cells of our immune system. They will encounter the antigen and they will kill the antigen by producing these antibodies. How? What are all the mechanisms? We are going to study. See here, the defense system in our body is broadly classified into two. One is non-specific immunity and the other is specific immunity. Non-specific immunity is the generalized response of our body to any kind of pathogen. Whatever the pathogen may enter, our body responds in the same way, that is a generalized response, and it will not produce any kind of antibodies. There is no role of antibodies in case of non-specific immunity. Whereas specific immunity is highly specific to the particular pathogen or an antigen, and it will kill the antigen by producing antibodies. The non-specific immunity consists of first line of defense and second line of defense. That means a pathogen, if it wants to enter into our body and proliferate an immune response, then it has to cross certain barriers. Those barriers are physical barriers, physiological barriers, cellular barriers, and interleukins. Why, how, on what basis they have classified this first line and second line means first line of defense is anatomical barriers they are. Whereas that means the pathogen has not still entered into the bloodstream. That is first line of defense. First line of defense will prevent the entry of pathogen into the blood. Whereas second line of defense comes into picture when the pathogen has made its entry through these barriers and enters into bloodstream. Hope you are all following. Once again, see the difference between first line and second line. First line of defense is the anatomical barrier. That means the pathogen is still outside the body. Whereas the second line of defense means when it comes into picture means already the pathogen has entered into bloodstream. Is that fine? And third line of defense, it has entered into our body and has already affected. Then what comes into picture is our actual immune system, that is B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. Now, the non-specific immunity, that is first line of defense. What are all those physical barriers, physiological barriers? We shall see. Physical barriers, they are also called as structural barriers or anatomical barriers. Structural barriers or anatomical barriers. First line of defense. The first line of defense. What are all coming in this first line of defense means skin. Apart from this, mucous membrane. Mucous membrane. First line of defense are known as anatomical or structural barriers. These two are called as anatomical or structural barriers. Okay. The intact skin is the largest defense organ. Importance here. Intact skin is the largest immune organ. See, skin contains, skin it is made up of stratified keratinized squamous epithelium. Very, very important. What is the epithelium that is present in the skin? Skin is made up of stratified keratinized. Keratin protein is present. We have studied all the epithelial tissues in your first year. Stratified keratinized squamous epithelium. Important for need. What is the epithelium that is present in the skin? The epithelium present in the skin is stratified squamous epithelium, keratinized epithelium. This keratin protein which act as waterproof. Okay, and it will also prevent the entry of pathogen. Apart from this, skin also consists of sweat glands. Sweat glands are also known as sudoriferous glands. Sudoriferous glands which secrete sweat which is having slightly acidic pH. Which is having slightly acidic pH. Under this acidic pH, bacteria cannot survive. Apart from this, skin also consists of oil glands. Oil glands or sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands which secrete sebum in the ear. The sebum which is present in the ear, it is known as earwax or cerumen, which will retard or prevent the entry of any pathogens into ear. All these secretions will not allow the pathogen to come into the body. So intact skin is the largest immune organ, which is made up of stratified keratinized squamous epithelium, which consists of sweat glands and these oil glands. These secretions are slightly acidic in nature and they will retard, they will prevent the entry of pathogen. They will prevent the entry of pathogen. And apart from this, acidic pH, sweat consists of acidic pH. Under this acidic pH, a pathogen cannot survive. This is regarding skin. And next one, mucous membrane. Second one is mucous membrane. See this mucous membrane, where does it present? The lining of mucous epithelium, it is present in different locations in our body. That is in the respiratory tract. Entire respiratory tract, it is lined by mucous membrane. Next, gastrointestinal tract. GI tract. Our alimentary canal is also lined by this mucous membrane. And third one, even urinogenital tract. Urinogenital tract. And in case of females, the vagina. Sorry. So all these regions are consisting of this mucous membrane. Then how it is preventing the entry of pathogen? Already pathogen has entered into our body. Then how this mucous membrane is preventing the pathogen to enter into the bloodstream means mucous membrane will entrap the pathogens. Entraps the pathogen and help our immune system to not fall into diseased condition. So as they are present physically, these two barriers are known as physical barriers or structural or anatomical barriers. Now coming to after these anatomical barriers, in the first line of defense, we also come across with physiological barriers. These two are physical barriers. The next one is physiological barriers. What comes in physiological barriers or chemical barriers? Physiological barriers. What comes in physiological barriers? These are chemical barriers. Physiological barriers are chemical barriers. Say for example, saliva. Saliva contains lysozyme enzyme. and even tears. Okay, saliva and tears both consist of lysozyme enzyme. This lysozyme enzyme is a bactericidal enzyme. And this lysozyme mostly acts upon gram-positive bacteria. Gram-positive bacteria. If any bacteria enters to the saliva or through the tears, it will break down the cell wall of the bacteria and it will prevent the entry of pathogen. So these are chemical barriers. So the first line of defense acts when the pathogen has not made its entry into the bloodstream. So there are two barriers in the first line of defense, that is physical barriers, and second one is physiological barriers. Physical barriers consist of skin and mucous membrane, whereas physiological barriers consist of saliva and tears. Skin is the largest immune organ, which consists of stratified keratinized epithelium, and whereas mucous membrane, which is present in the respiratory tract, gastrointestinal tract and urinogenital tract, which will entrap the pathogen and prevent the entry of pathogen into bloodstream. This is about first line of defense. Now next comes into picture. If the pathogen has crossed all these barriers and enter into our body, then what comes into picture is second line of defense. Second line of defense consists of all cellular barriers. What are all the cells? Macrophages, white blood cells, interleukins, inflammation, fever, all these comes under second line of defense. See here. Second line of defense. What does this second line of defense consist of? Cellular barriers and interleukins and interferons also. See here. Cellular barriers. Apart from this, interferons. Cellular barriers. What are all the cells that fight against with disease-causing pathogens? See here. White blood cells, also called as leukocytes. In the white blood cells, the monocytes, which has transformed into macrophages, and natural killer cells, okay. Apart from this, these three are cellular barriers: white blood cells, macrophages and natural killer cells. Interferons. Apart from this, inflammatory responses, inflammation and fever and complementary proteins. All these comes under the second line of defense. Okay. What are all those? One by one. In your first year, we have studied a detailed account on blood cells. Blood consists of a fluid part, plasma, and the cellular part, all these white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. In that, we had a brief classification of these white blood cells. So here, white blood cells are broadly classified into granulocytes and granulocytes. First, granulocytes. Granulocytes are having enzyme rich, some granules are there, whereas such specific granules are absent in case of agranulocytes. Hope you are all remembered this concept. White blood cells are classified. 68% of white blood cells are granulocytes, whereas 32% of white blood cells are granulocytes. Granulocytes are again, they are based on the staining technique. They have been classified into what? Neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. Neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils, isn't it? And granulocytes are divided into monocytes and lymphocytes. Monocytes and lymphocytes. Neutrophils are the smallest white blood cells. Remember, neutrophils are smallest white blood cells, and they are white blood cells. And if you remember the percentage, 68% of granulocytes are, this 65% are neutrophils, and basophils very less percentage, 0.1 to 0.5% are basophils. Okay, the smallest and most abundant white blood cells are neutrophils. And monocytes, see here, these monocytes, we shall talk separately regarding monocytes. The granulocytes, all these neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, they will get activated in case of any immune response. See, I have written all these with one color, whereas lymphocytes with black. What does it represent? Lymphocytes does not comes under non-specific immune response. We are talking about non-specific immune response, first line of defense and second line of defense. In the second line of defense, it consists of cellular barriers, whereas these lymphocytes does not comes under second line of defense. Lymphocytes comes under third line of defense. These are the actual heroes of our immune system, actual cells of our immune system are these lymphocytes. These lymphocytes are again, they are classified based on where they are produced. B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. B lymphocytes are produced in the bone marrow and they will get matured in the bone marrow, whereas T lymphocytes are produced in bone marrow but they will get matured in thymus. Okay, so B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. Again, B lymphocytes, they will proliferate in case of any immune response and they will give two cells, that is effector plasma cells and memory cells. Effector plasma cells and memory cells. Effector plasma cells and memory cells. A brief classification of white blood cells. White blood cells are classified into granulocytes and agranulocytes. Granulocytes are having specific granules, whereas such type of specific granules and enzyme-rich specific granules are absent in case of agranulocytes. This classification of neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils is based on the staining technique. Neutrophils are stained with neutral dyes, whereas eosinophils with acidic dyes, whereas basophils with basic dyes. So eosinophils are also known as acidophils. All these they will help in immune responses. And a separate note on these monocytes. Monocytes, they will leave the blood capillaries. See here, talking about monocytes. A special note on monocytes. See here. Monocytes of the blood, they will leave the blood capillary and enter the tissue. Leave the blood capillaries and enter into tissue. The mechanism, the involuntary movement shown by these monocytes leaving the blood capillaries and entering into tissues. Try to recollect what is that mechanism called? That is diapedesis. Okay. The mechanism by which monocytes of white blood cells leave the blood capillary and enter into tissues is known as diapedesis. Okay. These are diapedesis. So after entering into tissue, the monocytes are transformed into macrophages. Macrophages. Is that clear? Monocytes are itself the macrophages. Okay, they leave the blood capillary and they have entered into tissue. And these macrophages are of again two types. They are tissue fixed macrophages and wandering macrophages. Or they are called as fixed macrophages and wandering macrophages. There are specialized names for these macrophages based on their location. What are they? The macrophages of tissue are known as histiocytes. If they are present in the tissue, it is known as histiocyte. If they are present in the bone, macrophages of bone or immune cells of bone, they are osteoclast. Osteoclast present in the bone. When they are present in the nervous system, they are known as microglial cells. Microglial cells in the CNS. Okay. Whereas if they are present in liver, they are known as Kupffer cells. Kupffer cells in case of liver. What I am talking about? See, here I am talking about second line of defense, which consists of cellular barriers. The cellular barriers consist of white blood cells, macrophages, natural killer cells. White blood cells we have seen agranulocytes and granulocytes. Granulocytes are neutrophils, basophils and eosinophils, whereas agranulocytes are monocytes and lymphocytes. But lymphocytes does not comes under second line of defense. They comes under third line of defense. They are the actual cells of our immune system. Apart from that, second line of defense, the monocytes, they leave the blood capillary and enter into tissue by a mechanism called diapedesis. When they comes into the tissue, the monocytes are termed as macrophages. These macrophages are again of two types. Either they may be fixed or they may be roaming or wandering macrophages. Based on their location, if they are present in the tissue, they are known as histiocytes. In the bone, they are called as osteoclast. In the CNS, central nervous system, they are called microglial cells, and in the liver, they are called as Kupffer cells. Following? This is about white blood cells and macrophages. And these macrophages act as antigen presenting cells. Macrophages act as antigen presenting cells, APCs. How they are acting as antigen presenting cells? What is the mechanism involved? We shall discuss a bit later. Now, what are remaining in the cellular barriers? In the cellular barriers, natural killer cells, NK cells. Must see here, natural killer cells are neither T lymphocytes nor B lymphocytes. They are non-lymphocytic cells, but they will help in producing certain proteins and kill the antigen. See, NK cells. Why I am defining them with linking to lymphocytes? Lymphocytes, T lymphocytes, B lymphocytes, they kill the antigen by involving the antibodies. Isn't it? See here. But what is this? These natural killer cells, they do not kill the antigen directly, but they will kill the cell which is affected with antigen. See here. See a foreign particle, antigen, a pathogen which is a disease causing agent, if it has entered into our body, if T lymphocytes, they do not have the ability to produce antibody, they will help the B lymphocytes in producing the antibodies. These antibodies will go and destroy this antigen. But the NK cells, natural killer cells, do not have the ability to produce this antibody. So they cannot kill the antigen directly. Instead of killing the antigen, the natural killer cells will destroy the entire cell. Will destroy the entire cell which is infected with antigen. Okay. So how we can define natural killer cells are? Natural killer cells are non-B lymphocytes, non-B lymphocytic, nor non-T lymphocytic. Okay, but what? How they will kill means they kill the cells which are infected with antigen. Instead of killing the antigen, it is killing the entire cell. Kill this antigen. Hope you are all following. So natural killer cells are non-B lymphocytic and non-T lymphocytic and kills the antigen by killing the entire infected cell. So these are all the cellular barriers which will kill the pathogen. And in the second line of defense, it also includes second line of defense. The next one it includes interferons. What are these interferons? Interferons Third one, interferons are a specific proteins, globulin proteins, which are secreted by virus infected cell. See, in our body, it is a tissue. In the tissue, if a particular cell, if it is infected with virus, this is the cell which is infected with virus. Now the virus infected cell will secrete certain proteins. The proteins which are secreted by this virus infected cell. The proteins which are secreted by virus infected cells are known as interferons. Okay, important. What are interferons? Interferons are the proteins that are secreted by virus infected cells. Mostly these are glycoproteins. Is that clear? Interferons are glycoprotein. That means what does these proteins function? These proteins are giving message to the neighboring cells not to get infected with the virus. Okay, is that clear? And next one, inflammation. Inflammation. If any agent, a physical agent or a chemical agent or a biological agent, what are all these agents? Physical agent means a hit by a hard object may cause damage to the tissue, or chemicals, say for example HCl or H2SO4, highly concentrated acids. If they are fallen on our tissue, it will cause inflammation. Or any biological agent, say for example any insect or any pest can make an injury. In such cases, our body shows certain responses. Those responses is known as inflammation. What are the signs of inflammation, or what are the symptoms of inflammation? Means, see how inflammation causes means three agents are there. It may be physical, through the physical agent, or chemical agent, or any biological agents which cause damage to the tissue, which cause damage or injury to tissue. What happens when any injury happens means, what are all the symptoms? Inflammation. See, the affected area or the damaged part will have some swelling and pain will be there, and local warmth means some little raise in the temperature, and redness. Okay, these are all the symptoms of inflammation. Why these symptoms will occur? How? What are all the agents that are responsible, or what are the chemicals that are responsible for these symptoms? Before going to that, there are certain technical terms for this: swelling, pain, local raise in the temperature, warmness, and redness. They are swelling, tumor, pain, dollar, calor, and dollar. Rubor, tumor, calor, dollar. These are all the symptoms. Tumor means swelling, dollar means pain, calor means raising temperature, rubor, redness. Okay, these are all the symptoms of inflammation. How they are occurring? If you remember, we have talked about mast cells and even the basophil cells who will get activated in case of this injury of the tissue. Basophil cells and mast cells. They will secrete certain chemicals like histamine, serotonin, bradykinin, histamine. Okay, these are the chemicals, and even certain prostaglandins. These are responsible for these inflammatory reactions. See here, bradykinin and histamine. These are secreted by which cells? Mast cells and even basophil cells. Basophil cells secrete these chemicals. These chemicals are responsible for these inflammatory reactions. How it comes under second line of defense? See, if any injury occurs, if your immune system is not responding, then we cannot find that our body has been affected. But if it is showing the responses, means it says that our immune system is responding against the disease causing pathogen. So inflammation is one of the defense mechanism. And inflammation is of two types. It may be local inflammation or systemic inflammation. See, all these symptoms we can see in case of local inflammation. That means when we hit hardly by anything, then in that particular affected area, we can see all these symptoms. If the inflammation is systemic, if the entire body is under inflammation, then what does it is called? The complete systemic inflammation of the body is known as fever. The next symptom, the next defense mechanism, it is fever. So fever comes under second line of defense. Inflammation. Local inflammation, we can see all these symptoms. If the inflammation is systemic, entire body is affected because of the pathogen, then we can call it as fever. See here, systemic inflammatory response of the body. Systemic inflammatory response of the body is known as fever. Okay. How fever occurs? If we see hypothalamus. Hypothalamus, it is the thermostat of our body. It is the one, hypothalamus is the one who is controlling the temperature of our body. In case of this fever, inflammatory response, certain chemicals are secreted. They are known as pyrogens. Pyrexia. Fever, it is also known as pyrexia. Pyrogens are secreted. These pyrogens will go and stimulate this hypothalamus to increase the body temperature. Okay? When body temperature increases up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, it is the body can tolerate. More than 100 degrees and that body will turn to weak. Is that clear? So hypothalamus, it is important. It is the thermostat of our body which will regulate our body temperature. But in case of this systemic inflammatory response of our body, certain chemicals will be produced. Those chemicals are known as pyrogens. They will go and stimulate this hypothalamus to increase the body temperature, which will lead to fever. And the next one, last one, it is complementary proteins. Complementary proteins. What are those complementary proteins? Complementary proteins are a group of proteins which will fight against with these disease causing pathogens. A brief recap here. We have talked about immunology statement. It is a science which deals with our immune system and immune responses in fighting against the disease causing pathogen. And next one, who is the father of immunology? Father of immunology is Emil von Becquerel. And we have studied definition of immunity, the ability of our body to fight against with disease causing pathogen, and defense mechanism. It is broadly classified into non-specific and specific immunity. Non-specific immunity consists of first line of defense and second line of defense, whereas specific immunity consists of third line of defense. First line of defense consists of physical and physiological barriers. Physical barriers consist of skin and mucous membrane, and physiological membranes consist of chemical barriers, saliva and tears. And one more thing regarding physiological barriers. A note in the physiological barriers, chemical barriers. See here separately. I am talking about chemical barriers. Chemical barriers. In the chemical barriers, we have seen saliva and tears. Apart from that, oxyntic cells of our body. Oxyntic cells, which are also known as parietal cells. Oxyntic cells or parietal cells of our stomach, they will secrete HCl, hydrochloric acid, which is having highly acidic pH. 1.2 to 1.8 pH will be there. 1.8 pH, which is highly acidic pH, and in this highly acidic pH, bacteria cannot survive. This is one more point. And next one, in case of female vagina, it consists of bacteria called Lactobacillus Acidophilus. Lactobacillus Acidophilus. What does it will do? It will convert the glycogen into lactic acid. It will convert the glycogen into lactic acid. Presence of this lactic acid, again it will increase the pH of vagina, which will prevent the entry of any pathogens. Is that clear? Apart from saliva and apart from tears, these two. Okay, oxyntic cells, which are also known as parietal cells, which secrete HCl, and in the vagina of the female consists of Lactobacillus acidophilus bacteria, which will convert the glycogen into lactic acid, which will maintain the pH of vagina, which is essential for preventing the entry of any pathogens or any bacteria. Okay, and third, what we have discussed, second line of defense. In the second line of defense, we have studied about cellular barriers. Cellular barriers consist of white blood cells and macrophages and natural killer cells. Apart from that, inflammation, fever, interferons and complementary proteins. Complementary proteins are a set of glycoproteins which will act upon the antigen and they'll kill the antigen. Okay, these are second line of defense. Now, the third line of defense, what does it contain? third line of defense, it comes under specific immune response. Specific immune response. See, specific immune response, it is highly specific to antigen, to particular antigen, and it acts upon the antigen by producing antibodies. Okay, before going to that, how we can define antigen and antibody? Antigen, it is a foreign substance or any chemical which can elicit or provoke an immune response is known as antigen. Any chemical or any agent which can elicit an immune response is known as antigen. What is eliciting an immune response means? Which is capable of causing the disease. Then only our immune system will act upon that. So any chemical or any foreign material which can elicit or provoke an immune response is known as antigen. So antigen, it is nothing but a bacteria or a pathogen or any physical or chemical agent which can eliciting our immune system to respond against that is known as antigen. What are antibodies? These are the proteins which are produced in response to antigen are known as antibodies. Once again, see here, antigen, it should be foreign particle. The foreign particles or any chemical which can elicit or provoke an immune response. If not cause disease is known as antigen. Sometimes antigen is referred as immunogen, but there are little differences there. But up to now, remember, antigen is also known as immunogen. And if you split the term antigen, antigen, what does it mean? Anti means antibody. Gen, produce, generator. Antigen is the one who is helping in the production of antibodies. That means antigen is the one who is irritating our immune system. Our immune system is quiet, but this antigen has come and disturbing this immune system. So our immune system will not keep quiet. What does it will do? The immune system will produce antibodies in response to this antigen. So any foreign material which can elicit an immune response is known as antigen. Is that clear? Then what is antibody? Antibodies they are proteins. Okay, these are proteins which are produced in response to antigen. The specific proteins which are produced in response to antigen are known as antibodies. Is that clear? Antibodies are also known as immunoglobulins or immunoglobulins. Antibodies are known as immunoglobulin. They belong to the globulin class. Okay. immunoglobulins, and they are referred as Ig. Immunoglobulins Ig. Is that clear? Now, antigen. See, the entire surface of the antigen or the entire antigen cannot cause the disease. Now, there are certain sites on the antigen which are capable of causing the disease. That specific site present on the antigen which is capable of causing the disease is known as antigen determinant site. Say for example, see here, this is antigen. The entire antigen is not able to cause the disease. There is a specific site in the antigen. Say this side or this side. Okay. This is the site where it can cause the disease. So the disease causing site present in the antigen is known as antigen determinant site. Antigen determinant site. Okay. And this antigen, it will go and bind with the antibody by having certain surface proteins. Okay. This is the site where, if this is the antigen, this is the site where it can go and bind with antibody. So the site which can interact with the antibody present on the antigen is known as epitope. This is epitope. The site which is present on the antigen which can interact with the antibody is known as epitope. Antigen is there. Antigen is the foreign particle which can elicit or provoke an immune system or which can cause the disease. But the entire antigen cannot cause the disease. There is a particular site in the antigen that is known as antigenic determinant site, and it is present on the surface of this antigen. There are certain proteins. These are known as, that site it is known as epitope, which can bind with the antibody. The site present on the antibody for binding this antigen, it is known as paratope. We shall discuss that later. So, all the antigens cannot cause immune response. There are certain antigens which cannot cause disease. There are certain half antigens. That half antigens are known as haptens. Haptens. What are these haptens? Why they are called as half antigen? What we have discussed, antigen is a substance which should able to cause a disease. That means it should have immunogenicity and it should react. Reactivity should be there. But these haptens, they does not have the capacity to cause disease on their own. They should combine with the protein. So hapten plus protein, they can be causing a disease. Is that clear? Antigens are also, they are protein. They are large protein molecules and they are large molecular weight proteins. These are large protein molecules. Antigens are large protein molecules, whereas hapten does not have these proteins, so it is a half antigen which does not have the capacity to cause disease, so it is called as hapten. Okay, today we have discussed about first line of defense, second line of defense, and third line of defense. In the third line of defense, an introduction to antigen and antibody we have discussed. and cilia. We shall talk about even B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes and structure of antibody a bit later. This is antigen. The agent which can cause the disease or which can provoke an immune response is known as antigen. Must see here. In the immune response, we have seen the lymphocytes, T lymphocytes, which are produced in bone marrow and they are matured in bone marrow. Whereas T lymphocytes are produced in the bone marrow and they get matured in thymus. B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. T lymphocytes do not have the ability to produce antibodies. But how they are involved in this specific defense means these T lymphocytes will help the B lymphocytes in the production of antibodies. In the production of antibodies. When these B lymphocytes get matured and they get interacted with the antigen, these B lymphocytes will proliferate and produces two different types of cell population. That is, one is effector plasma cells, and memory cells. And how these effector plasma cells and memory cells will act, we shall discuss in the next class.